My name is Grant Wexler, and I'm 35 years old. For the past 10 years, I've been building something meaningful in the transportation industry, right here in Denver, Colorado. My brother, Jake, and I started our family holding company from scratch, working 18-hour days, reinvesting every dollar back into the business. We focused on logistics solutions for mid-sized manufacturing companies across the Midwest. By 2019, our hard work had paid off. We were pulling in seven figures annually. I met Tessa at a networking event in downtown Denver. She was 27 at the time, worked in marketing for a tech startup, and had this infectious laugh that could light up an entire room. We hit it off immediately. After dating for 2 years, I proposed in 2020. Our wedding was everything she had dreamed of. A destination ceremony in Napa Valley, 200 guests, and a reception that cost more than most people make in an entire year. Honestly, I didn't mind the expense. I was making good money, and I wanted her to be happy. But what Tessa didn't know, what nobody knew except Jake and our attorney, was that I had been carefully preparing long before we even met. Back in 2017, 3 years before our paths crossed, I had established a family trust and LLC structure on my father's advice. The house in Cherry Hills Village, the BMW X7, my portfolio of municipal bonds and tech stocks, even the vintage Rolex my grandfather left me, all of it was protected under the family trust. My father always warned me, "Son, hope for the best, but plan for the worst." I took that advice seriously. I had watched too many successful men get cleaned out in divorce court, and I wasn't about to be one of them. The first 3 years of our marriage were genuinely good. Tessa seemed happy. We traveled to Europe, hosted dinner parties at our 4-bedroom house, and enjoyed life comfortably. She knew I was successful, but I never flaunted the full extent of our wealth. She assumed we had maybe $500,000 in assets. In reality, it was closer to $3 million. But by early 2024, in our 4th year of marriage, I started noticing changes. Tessa began coming home late from work, claiming client dinners or team meetings. She grew secretive with her phone, taking calls in another room, quickly closing her laptop when I walked by. When I asked about her day, her answers became vague, rehearsed, almost robotic. She stopped talking about our future. No mention of kids, no talk about buying a bigger house. Then came the call that changed everything. It was 7 a.m. on a Tuesday in March 2024, and Jake was on the line. Our biggest client, which represented nearly 40% of our revenue, was terminating their contract immediately. They had been acquired by a competitor that planned to handle logistics in-house. Just like that, our cash flow was gutted. Jake and I made the difficult decision to sell 30% of our stake to a larger transportation firm to keep the company afloat. It was the right move long-term, but it meant I had to step back from day-to-day operations. The new partners wanted their own management team in place. I was essentially forced out of the company I had built from scratch. I still retained my ownership percentage and distributions, but the life I had built was suddenly shifting under my feet. When I came home that evening and explained the situation to Tessa, I expected support, maybe even reassurance that we would get through it together. Instead, I saw something I had never seen in her eyes before: calculation. 3 days later, Tessa dropped the bomb. I was in my home office, reviewing financial statements, when she walked in and sat across from me. No warning, no preamble. "I want a divorce, Grant," she said calmly. I looked up from my laptop. "What?" "Tessa, this isn't working because of the business. We can get through this." She shook her head, her voice cold and firm. "It's not about the business. I just need something different. I need space to figure out what I want. I'm moving out this weekend. I've already found a place and contacted a lawyer." It hit me then. The pieces fell into place. The late nights, the secretive calls, the emotional distance. She was seeing someone. I asked, my voice shaking, "Who?" She didn't hesitate. "Lucas Reed. He works at your company. We've been close for the past few months." Close. The word echoed in my mind. She didn't deny it, and she didn't even try to look ashamed. That's when I realized how carefully I had planned my life and my assets. Not for any anticipation of betrayal from Tessa, but because life, as it turns out, is unpredictable in ways even the most meticulous planning can't control. While we've been married, Grant, Tessa said, her tone unusually calm. Let's not make this uglier than it needs to be. I want this to be amicable. We can split everything 50/50ths. Sell the house. Divide the accounts. You'll be fine. I almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. She had betrayed me, abandoned our marriage for her coworker, and now expected me to hand over half of everything I'd spent years building. What she didn't realize was that, legally speaking, there was almost nothing to split. I see, I said, keeping my voice calm. And you've thought this through? Of course, she replied with confidence. Colorado is an equitable distribution state. I'm entitled to half of all marital assets. She stood up, smoothing her skirt like this was just another business negotiation. My lawyer, she said, David Rodriguez, he handles divorces for several people in my company, says cases like ours usually settle within 60 days. Since we don't have kids, it should be straightforward. I nodded slowly, deliberately. Well, I suppose I should get my own attorney then. That would probably be best, she said, pausing at the doorway. Then, softer, almost wistfully, for what it's worth, Grant, I did love you once. And just like that, she was gone. I sat in my office long after she left, not angry, not desperate, just calculating. I picked up my phone and called Jake first. She wants a divorce, I said. Jesus, Grant. I'm sorry, man, Jake replied. What are you going to do? Nothing dramatic, I told him. I'm going to let her play her hand. Play her hand? He asked, confused. She thinks she's entitled to half of everything. She has no idea what everything actually is, I said. The prenup? We never signed one. I didn't need to. There was a pause on the other end of the line. The trust structure, Jake finally said. Exactly, I said, feeling a calm satisfaction settle over me. She's about to learn the hard way the difference between marital property and separate property. Next, I called Robert Mitchell, the attorney who had helped me set up the family trust and LLC back in 2017. I explained the situation in detail. Let me guess, Robert said almost immediately. She assumes that the house, cars, and investments are marital assets. That would be correct, I said. Well, he replied, they're not. The house is owned by the trust, which you established in 2017, 3 years before you even met her. The BMW is registered to the LLC. Your investment accounts are in the trust name. Even that Rolex is documented as an inheritance held in trust. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of that reality sink in. She had walked into this thinking she could claim half of a fortune she had no legal right to touch. And now, I was about to show her just how carefully I had protected everything I had worked so hard to build. What about her car? I asked Robert. The Mercedes? He replied. It's titled in your name, personally, and purchased with your separate funds as a wedding gift. Technically, it remains your separate property. And joint accounts? I asked next. What joint accounts? He said with a hint of amusement. You never established any. She had access to your personal checking account for household expenses with a debit card, but that account remains solely in your name. I smiled, a real smile, for the first time in days. Exactly as I thought. Grant, Robert said after a pause, I have to ask, did you plan this? I planned for this possibility, I said calmly. There's a difference. That weekend, I sat in my home office, watching from the window as Tessa packed her belongings into Lucas Reed's Honda Accord. He was exactly what I had imagined. Mid-30s, a receding hairline, trying far too hard to look successful in his ill-fitting discount suit. He kept checking his phone nervously and stealing glances at the house, as though he was about to get caught doing something he shouldn't. Tessa moved with purpose, shoving clothes and personal items into garbage bags, as if she were fleeing a crime scene. She left her keys to the house and the Mercedes on the kitchen counter, along with a note. Grant, I hope we can handle this like adults. My attorney will be in touch with yours soon. Tessa, I poured myself 2 fingers of Maker's Mark, raised the glass to my empty house, and toasted. Phase 1 was complete. She had played exactly the hand I expected her to play. Now it was time to let the legal system do what it does best, enforce the law. 2 weeks later, Robert called with an update. I just received a call from David Rodriguez. Your ex-wife's attorney. Ex-wife, I corrected casually. Right, Robert chuckled. Anyway, he's demanding full financial disclosure. Bank statements, property deeds, investment summaries, the works. He also mentioned she's requesting temporary spousal support during the proceedings. Temporary spousal support? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Apparently, she can't afford her share of the rent at Mr. Reed's apartment, Robert said dryly. She's not working since leaving your house. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. The audacity was astounding. What did you tell him? I asked. That we'll be happy to provide full disclosure of all marital assets. I'm preparing the response now, Robert said. I leaned back in my chair, swirling the whiskey in my glass. Every step she had taken, the late nights, the secretive calls, the abrupt demands, had played right into my hands. Tessa had underestimated the difference between perception and reality, and now the law would make that distinction painfully clear. How long until they realize? I asked Robert. Oh, I'd say about 5 minutes after Rodriguez opens the file, he replied with a grin. Robert's prediction turned out to be eerily accurate. 3 days later, my phone rang at 8 a.m. I could hear Tessa's voice in the background, clearly agitated. Mr. Wexler, Rodriguez said, trying to sound calm, I think there's been some kind of mistake with the documentation your attorney provided. What kind of mistake? I asked, sipping my coffee. Well, he continued, according to these records, you don't actually own any significant marital property. The house is held in a family trust established in 2017. The BMW is registered to an LLC. Your investment accounts predate the marriage and are also held in trust. Is that accurate? I took another slow sip of coffee. It is. And the joint accounts? He pressed. There are no joint accounts, Mr. Rodriguez. I explained. My wife had access to my personal checking account for household expenses through a debit card I gave her, but we never established any joint accounts. In the background, I could hear Tessa shouting, her voice rising with frustration. Something about this not being legal and accusations that I was hiding assets. Mr. Wexler, Rodriguez said cautiously, my client is extremely upset. She feels that you may have deliberately concealed the true nature of your holdings. I leaned back in my chair and smiled faintly. Mr. Rodriguez, I'm curious. Did your client tell you that I established the trust structure in 2017, 3 years before I even met her? Silence. Did she mention that all of this information is available in public records? I pressed further. She could have researched property ownership at any time during our marriage. More silence. The trust documents are filed with Jefferson County. The LLC registration is with the Colorado Secretary of State. Everything is completely transparent and legal, I added firmly. I heard Tessa grab the phone from Rodriguez's hand. Grant, this isn't fair. You can't just hide everything in some trust. I didn't hide anything, Tessa, I said evenly. I protected my assets using standard legal instruments that existed 3 years before I even knew you. Your attorney can explain the difference. But we're married. I'm entitled to half, she shouted. You're entitled to half of the marital assets, I replied calmly. The assets in the trust aren't marital property. They weren't acquired during our marriage. They were acquired years before I ever met you. The line went dead. An hour later, Robert called, laughing. Rodriguez just requested a meeting. He wants to discuss a reasonable settlement. What's reasonable to them? I asked. They're asking for the Mercedes $50,000 in cash and temporary alimony of $3,000 a month, he said. I set my coffee down, swirling the liquid in my cup. They had finally realized the limits of what they could claim, but I wasn't rushing. I had the law, the trust, and years of careful planning on my side. Now, it was just a matter of watching how this unfolded. I made a counteroffer. I told Rodriguez that we'd consider letting Tessa keep the clothes she had already taken. Beyond that, I've been quietly documenting everything. Lucas Reed, it turned out, was making my life far easier than I could have imagined through social media. His Instagram was a goldmine. Photos of him and Tessa dining out during what should have been work hours. Pictures from weekend trips to Aspen and Boulder. Selfies taken inside my house while I was out of town on business. The metadata on the images confirmed the dates went all the way back to October 2023, 5 months before Tessa even asked for a divorce. I dug a little deeper. Through Jake's friend, who worked in the same building as Tessa's marketing firm, I learned more about Lucas. He had been laid off from 2 previous jobs for performance issues. His current role was already on shaky ground. Apparently, he had a reputation for office relationships and cutting corners on client work. It was clear he wasn't exactly a pillar of stability. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in downtown Denver. I wore my best suit, a charcoal Tom Ford I had purchased for client meetings. Tessa showed up in the dress I had bought her for our 2nd anniversary, now looking slightly worn. The irony wasn't lost on me. Judge Patricia Hendris reviewed the case file while we waited. She was known for being no-nonsense, someone who cut through legal theatrics with ruthless efficiency. Mr. Rodriguez, Judge Hendris began, I've reviewed your client's petition. She's requesting equitable distribution of marital assets, temporary spousal support, and attorney's fees. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Rodriguez replied. And Mr. Mitchell, your client disputes these claims? The judge continued. We do, Your Honor, Robert said firmly. We contend that there are virtually no marital assets to distribute. I listened quietly, watching Tessa shift in her seat, trying to mask her frustration. She had walked into this thinking the courtroom would bend to her expectations. She didn't realize just how carefully every detail of my financial life had been structured, or how thoroughly I had prepared for this moment. Judge Hendris turned her gaze toward Tessa. Mrs. Wexler, were you aware of your husband's trust and LLC structure when you married him? Tessa shifted uncomfortably in her seat. No, Your Honor. Not really. I knew he was successful, but I didn't know about all the legal arrangements. I see, the judge said, jotting notes. And during your 4-year marriage, did you contribute financially to the acquisition or improvement of any of these assets? Tessa hesitated. I paid for groceries, sometimes with the debit card he gave me, and I helped with decorating the house. Did you contribute to the mortgage payments, which are paid by the trust? The judge asked. No, Your Honor. Or to the vehicle payments made by the LLC? No. Judge Hendris made additional notes before looking up. Mr. Rodriguez, do you have any evidence that your client made substantial financial contributions to the acquisition or improvement of the trust assets? Rodriguez shuffled through his papers. We believe Mrs. Wexler's domestic contributions during the marriage should be considered. Mr. Rodriguez, Judge Hendris said sharply, domestic contributions do not transform separate property, established years before the marriage, into marital property. You should know this. The hearing lasted just 23 minutes. 2 days later, Judge Hendris delivered her preliminary ruling. No spousal support, no equitable distribution of trust assets, no attorney's fees. Tessa would be allowed to keep her personal belongings, and that was it. The final hearing was scheduled 6 weeks later, but Robert assured me it would be a mere formality. She can appeal, he said over lunch at the Brown Palace Hotel, but she has no grounds. Colorado law is very clear on separate property versus marital property, especially when the assets predate the marriage by years. What about her attorney? I asked. Robert chuckled. Rodriguez is already backpedaling. He's telling people this was a complex asset protection case, impossible to predict. Translation: he didn't do his homework, and he's embarrassed. Meanwhile, life had its own way of delivering justice. 2 weeks after the preliminary hearing, Jake called me with news. You remember Lucas Reed, Tessa's boyfriend? He asked. What about him? I replied. He got fired yesterday, Jake said. Apparently, his last 3 client campaigns were disasters. They lost the agency nearly $200,000 in billing. I raised an eyebrow. Any idea why his performance suddenly declined? Word is he's been distracted, Jake said. Relationship drama, financial stress from trying to support both himself and Tessa on his salary. His supervisor said he's been making careless mistakes and missing deadlines. I wasn't surprised. Lucas had gone from bachelor living to supporting himself and Tessa on a marketing associate salary, barely enough to cover his own previous expenses. The stress was clearly affecting his work performance. The poetic justice didn't end there. The following week, I was having coffee at Starbucks near my house when my phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "Grant, we need to talk." "Tessa." I deleted it. An hour later, another message. "Grant, please. I made a mistake. Can we work this out?" Deleted again. That evening. "I know you're getting these messages. Lucas lost his job. I can't afford my share of the apartment rent. Please call me." I poured myself a whiskey and settled in to watch the Broncos game. The messages continued for 3 days, each one more desperate than the last. "I'll drop the divorce. We could try counseling. I never loved him." I simply sat back, savoring the quiet, and let the reality sink in. Years of careful planning, patience, and strategic preparation had brought me here. Not just a victory in court, but to witnessing the consequences of choices unfold in real time. "That I'll sign a postnup," she said. On Thursday, she showed up at my house. I watched from the window as she stepped out of an Uber. She no longer had access to the Mercedes. She looked different, older somehow. Her hair was cheaper, just a drugstore cut in color. The designer clothes were gone, replaced with bargain store basics. She rang the doorbell. I didn't answer. She knocked. I turned up the television. She called my name through the door. I went to the kitchen and made a sandwich. Finally, I heard her footsteps retreat down the driveway. The final divorce hearing took place on a cold Tuesday in November 2024. Tessa showed up with a different attorney, a young public defender who looked like she would rather be anywhere else. Rodriguez had dropped Tessa as a client, citing inability to pay legal fees. Judge Hendricks made it official in less than 10 minutes. No alimony, no property distribution, and each party responsible for their own attorney's fees. The marriage was dissolved. As we walked out of the Jefferson County Courthouse, Tessa made one last desperate attempt. "Grant, wait." I kept walking toward my BMW. "Grant, please. I'm living in a studio apartment in Aurora. I'm working at a call center. I can barely afford groceries." I reached my car and got in. She knocked on the window. "I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you, but we had 4 good years. Doesn't that count for something?" I started the engine. Through the windshield, I saw her crying. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the calculation in her eyes when I told her I'd lost my position. I remembered how quickly she moved in with Lucas. I remembered her assumption that she was entitled to half of everything I had worked so hard to build. I drove away. 6 months later, Jake called with updates. Tessa and Lucas had broken up. The stress of his unemployment and their financial problems had destroyed their relationship. She was working 2 part-time jobs, the call center during the day and waiting tables at night, living with a roommate she found on Craigslist. Meanwhile, I had used my forced break from day-to-day operations to consult for other transportation companies. The work was lucrative, flexible, and, surprisingly, enjoyable. I also started dating again, carefully this time, with proper legal protections in place, but with genuine optimism. As for Lucas Reed, the last I heard, he was selling insurance in Kansas City. Apparently, Denver marketing agencies have long memories when it comes to costly client disasters. I never responded to any of Tessa's messages. Not the texts, not the emails, not the handwritten letter that arrived on what would have been our 5th wedding anniversary. Silence, I learned, is sometimes the most powerful response of all. People sometimes ask if I feel guilty about how things turned out for her. I don't. I didn't destroy Tessa's life. Her choices did that. I didn't force her to cheat, abandon our marriage, or assume she was entitled to assets she had never contributed to acquiring. I simply protected myself using legal tools I had established. My father's advice had been right. Hope for the best, but plan for the worst. In business and in life, preparation isn't paranoia, it's wisdom. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just letting people face the natural consequences of their own actions while you move forward with your life intact. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.